Across the burning Sahara, caravans carried enormous slabs of salt toward a kingdom built between desert and gold. Its rulers controlled neither every mine nor every goldfield, yet merchants could not avoid their roads, markets, and taxes. From this dangerous trade rose ancient Ghana, one of West Africa's wealthiest empires. But how did ordinary salt become the foundation of royal power, and why did that empire eventually disappear? Before we go deeper, like the video and subscribe for more forgotten history and ancient mysteries, the first light does not soften the Sahara, it reveals it. A pale line spreads over a horizon so flat and empty that distance seems to have stopped meaning anything, and beneath that widening sky, a caravan begins to move. The camels rise one after another, groaning under loads that appear strangely humble, long grey-white slabs rough at the edges packed in leather and rope. They are not jewels, they do not shine. They are blocks of salt cut from ancient deposits buried beneath one of the harshest landscapes on earth. Yet far to the south beyond the dunes, stony plateaus, thorn country, and the dry grasslands of the Sahel, these slabs can command extraordinary value. In some markets, later writers claim salt is exchanged for gold by weight. That famous image has often been repeated too neatly, and scholars still debate how literal it was in different times and places, but the larger truth is beyond dispute. Salt helps bind together one of the great commercial systems of the medieval world. To understand why it is necessary to forget the modern idea of salt as something cheap, clean, and always within reach. For people living in hot climates, salt is not merely a seasoning. It is a biological necessity lost through sweat and required to keep the body functioning. It preserves meat and fish. It helps make dairy products last longer. It supports animal health. It strengthens certain food processing traditions and allows communities to store part of a harvest against leaner months. Where humidity is high and food spoils quickly, the difference between having salt and lacking it can become the difference between security and hunger. A household may use only modest amounts each day, but multiplied across towns, armies, herds, and trading communities, demand becomes immense. The strange imbalance is that some of the richest salt deposits lie in places where almost nothing else can live. Across the central and western Sahara, ancient seas and evaporating basins left mineral beds beneath the desert. In certain zones, salt can be dug or quarried in thick layers, but the mines exist far from reliable farmland, permanent rivers, timber and pasture. Workers may cut great rectangular slabs from the earth, yet they cannot feed themselves from the landscape around them. Grain dates, cloth tools, and sometimes even drinking water must arrive from elsewhere. The mine produces something essential, while depending completely on distant societies for survival. That contradiction gives salt its power. It is abundant in the ground, but costly in human effort, transport, and risk. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Now the caravan enters the open desert. The animals walk in lines because the usable path is often less a road than a chain of remembered directions. A ridge shaped like a sleeping animal, a black outcrop against the horizon, a sequence of wells, the angle of the stars, the character of the wind, and the judgment of guides all matter. Sand can bury tracks within hours. Heat distorts distance. A well recorded in memory may be choked, fouled, or dry. A traveller who miscalculates water does not simply arrive late. He may vanish into a landscape where even his bones are eventually scattered and concealed. The camel makes this trade possible on a scale earlier the transport could rarely sustain. It can carry heavy loads, endure long periods with limited water, and move across terrain that defeats wheeled vehicles. But the popular picture of camels drifting effortlessly over endless dunes hides the difficult logistics behind every successful crossing. Animals need rest fodder, careful loading and experienced handling. Feet are injured, pack ropes cut skin. Salt itself is heavy and unforgiving. A single large caravan represents an organized moving economy of merchants, guides, servants, guards, drovers, animals, credit arrangements and agreements made long before departure. The desert crossing is not an adventure at the edge of commerce. It is commerce in its most exposed form. Far to the south, the mineral changes meaning again. In the Sahel and Savannah, salt may be broken into smaller pieces traded through several hands, or carried farther toward forest zones where local supplies are more limited. It passes through markets crowded with grain, leather, copper goods, woven cloth, livestock, cola nuts, and gold. The gold is the element that captures distant imaginations. It comes from regions south of the Great Desert, especially from river systems and geological zones where miners recover dust flakes and nuggets from soils and stream beds. Much of the mining remains outside the direct view of northern visitors. Gold moves north through African commercial networks while salt moves south. Between them stand brokers, rulers, transport specialists and market towns that understand something fundamental. The greatest profit often belongs not to the place that produces a valuable resource, but to the power that controls its movement. That exchange is easy to romanticize. Salt on one side, gold on the other, two precious substances crossing in opposite directions like pieces in a perfect equation. Reality is messier. Prices change according to season, distance, supply, political security, and local need. Salt that is relatively cheap near a desert mine becomes far more expensive after weeks of transport. Gold varies in purity and form. Merchants do not always exchange one directly for the other. Grain, textiles, copper slaves, livestock, and credit may stand between them. What survives in the record suggests a layered system rather than a single fixed bargain. Even so, the contrast is powerful because it reveals how geography creates value. A block of salt can be ordinary at its source and precious at its destination. A grain of gold can be gathered in the south and transformed into currency ornament and royal wealth thousands of kilometers away. There is another detail that modern accounts often miss. Salt is not simply consumed and gone. In some communities, it becomes a visible store of value, stacked, divided, weighed, and used to settle obligations. It can circulate in standardized pieces. It can support taxation. It can be presented to elites or distributed to dependents. Because everyone understands its usefulness, it carries a practical credibility that more symbolic forms of wealth may lack. Yet it is also fragile. Moisture eats it. Rough handling breaks it. Long journeys reduce it. Traders are carrying wealth that can literally dissolve. At the desert's southern edge, markets emerge where ecological worlds overlap. Northward lie date palms, oasis agriculture, and the long routes toward Morocco, Algeria, and the Mediterranean. Southward lie millet fields, cattle country, river valleys, and the gold-bearing regions beyond. No single environment provides everything. That is why the boundary becomes so productive. Pastoralists bring animals and knowledge of dry country. Farmers bring grain. Desert merchants bring salt and northern goods. Southern traders bring gold and forest products. Languages mix. Religious customs meet. News travels with merchandise reports of a safe well. A hostile ruler, a new tax, a failed harvest, a rich strike, or a caravan that never arrived. The wealth generated here does not remain in private hands for long. Any ruler who can protect a market, regulate a crossing, or tax a load gains an advantage. A levy collected once may seem small, but the same goods can be taxed as they enter, leave, or pass through different territories. Control does not require owning every mine or goldfield. It requires making oneself unavoidable. The future power of West Africa's great kingdoms grows from this principle. Their rulers stand between zones of abundance and zones of need, turning geography into authority. But before palaces, royal courts, and famous capitals appear, there is first this long chain of necessity, the miner cutting salt in a lifeless basin, the camel driver tightening a load before dawn, the guide reading a nearly invisible route, the market official weighing a slab, the southern trader testing metal dust between his fingers. None sees the entire system. Each understands only the part that keeps him alive. Together they create a network vast enough to reshape states. By midday the caravan is a dark thread beneath a white sky. Heat presses down. The salt rides silently on the animals' backs, unimpressive and indispensable. Somewhere beyond the horizon people are waiting for it, not because it is rare in the world, but because the desert has placed it far from those who need it most. And in that distance, in the dangerous space between mine and market, the foundations of a kingdom are already beginning to form. The kingdom that will eventually dominate this trade does not rise from the desert itself. It forms along the uncertain border where the Sahara begins to loosen its grip, and the dry grasslands of the Sahel stretch southward. This is not a clean frontier. Rainfall changes gradually, grasses thicken and thin with the seasons, and communities survive by moving between different ways of life. Farmers cultivate millet and sorghum where the soil allows it. Herders follow pasture with cattle, sheep, and goats. Hunters and gatherers work the spaces beyond settled fields. Merchants travel between them all, carrying goods that no single landscape can supply on its own. To the north, Berber-speaking peoples have long occupied the mountains, oases, and desert margins of North Africa. They are not one unified nation, but many communities with their own alliances, rivalries, and territories. Some live as pastoralists. Others control oasis settlements or participate in long-distance trade. Their knowledge of desert routes is accumulated over generations, preserved not in maps, but in experience how far an animal can travel between wells, which winds announce a storm, which tribes demand payment, and which paths remain usable when familiar tracks disappear beneath sand. South of them, Soninke-speaking communities inhabit a region crossed by seasonal rivers and ancient trade paths. They live near the upper valleys of the Senegal and Niger river systems in lands that are neither fully desert nor humid forest. Their position is difficult but valuable. Rainfall can be unreliable, yet the region supports agriculture and livestock. More importantly, it stands between the salt-producing north and the gold-producing zones farther south. Long before a powerful state appears, people here are already exchanging grain, livestock, metals, leather and mineral products through local and regional markets. The rise of trans-Saharan commerce is often described as though the camel suddenly unlocks a sealed continent. The reality is more gradual. North and West Africa are never entirely isolated from one another. Goods, people, and ideas move across desert and semi-desert routes in earlier periods, sometimes in small quantities, and through chains of exchange. Horses, oxen, and human porters all play roles in regional transport. The widespread use of the camel, however, changes the scale and reliability of movement. By late antiquity and the early medieval centuries, caravans can carry heavier loads across longer distances, making regular commercial links increasingly practical. Even then, the desert does not become easy. It becomes economically crossable. That distinction matters. A merchant must still calculate whether the value of his cargo justifies the cost of animals, guides protection, food losses, and time. Salt meets this test because demand is broad and constant. Gold meets it because a small quantity contains enormous value. Together they create an unusually effective pairing: bulky mineral wealth moving south, compact precious wealth moving north. Between these two flows, the Sahelian communities gain leverage. They can provide food, water, animals, repair storage and security. They can direct merchants toward trusted markets. They can deny access to rivals. What begins as a collection of stopping places and local exchanges gradually becomes a political opportunity. A ruler who protects trade can attract more merchants. More merchants create more taxable wealth. More revenue supports soldiers and officials. Those soldiers can secure a wider territory, drawing still more commerce into the same network. This process does not happen in a single moment, and the evidence remains incomplete. Archaeology reveals settlements, imported objects, changing patterns of production, and signs of growing social complexity, but it cannot identify the exact year when scattered authority becomes a kingdom. Oral traditions preserve memories of migration founders, royal clans, and sacred power. Yet these traditions were transmitted across centuries and shaped by later events. Written accounts from outside the region appear only after important developments are already underway. The beginnings of the state are therefore visible mostly through their consequences. One surprising clue lies in the movement of copper. Copper and copper alloy objects appear in West African contexts, far from major sources of the metal. Some arrive from Saharan or North African regions, while other supplies may come through different internal networks. Copper has practical value, but it also carries prestige. It can be shaped into ornaments, tools, and symbols of rank. Its presence shows that the trade crossing the desert is never only about two commodities. Salt and gold provide the strongest economic axis, but around them circulates a wider world of cloth beads, weapons, horses, manuscripts, ivory, and enslaved people. The communities controlling the southern terminals must also manage cultural difference. Desert merchants may speak different languages, follow different legal customs, and later increasingly practice Islam. Local populations maintain their own religious traditions, political rituals, and concepts of land and kingship. Trade succeeds not because these differences disappear, but because practical systems develop around them. Brokers translate, hosts provide lodging, market authorities define acceptable weights and payments. Oaths and reputations create trust where formal enforcement is limited. A merchant's name can become as important as his cargo, because one act of fraud may close an entire route to him. At the same time, the landscape itself remains unstable. The Sahel shifts with rainfall. Several good seasons can expand farming and pasture. Repeated droughts can push herders south, reduce harvests, weaken settlements, and make caravan provisioning more difficult. Rivers alter their channels, wells fail, grasslands retreat or return. Political power in this environment cannot depend only on walls or armies. It depends on maintaining movement through a landscape that is constantly changing. This helps explain why the earliest centers of authority appear near corridors rather than isolated resources. The future kingdom does not need to sit directly on the richest gold deposits. In fact, the rulers may benefit from keeping the sources distant and partly concealed. Nor must they occupy every salt mine. Their strength comes from controlling the middle ground, where caravans must stop, goods must be exchanged, and merchants must accept local protection and taxation. Over generations, that middle ground begins to harden into a state. Soninka leaders draw settlements into wider alliances. Tribute flows towards central authorities. Armed retainers protect routes and enforce royal demands. Sacred traditions strengthen political legitimacy, presenting the ruler not merely as a wealthy chief, but as a figure whose authority helps preserve order between people, land, and the unseen world. The desert to the north and the gold country to the south remain beyond complete control, yet between them, a new power is learning how to profit from both. It will be known to outsiders by a royal title, that gradually becomes the name of an empire, Ghana. The name Ghana enters the written record from outside, carried across the same routes that bring salt gold cloth and news. To the people who build the kingdom, the state is more closely associated with Wagadu, a name preserved most strongly in later Soninka oral tradition. Ghana is probably a royal title, something closer to warrior king or ruler than the original name of the land itself. Foreign merchants and geographers encounter the title so often that it becomes attached to the entire kingdom. Centuries later, the modern nation of Ghana will adopt the name in honor of this earlier empire, although the ancient kingdom lies much farther northwest, across parts of present-day Mauritania, Mali and Senegal. Its rise is not the work of a single conqueror appearing suddenly from the grasslands. It grows through the steady concentration of authority among Soninke-speaking communities already positioned within the commercial middle ground. Villages become linked to larger settlements. Local chiefs become tributaries or allies of stronger rulers. Agricultural surpluses feed specialists who do not spend every day in the fields. Metalworkers, soldiers, administrators, religious figures and merchants. The kingdom expands because it can organize these people and resources more effectively than its rivals. The oldest stages remain difficult to date. Later traditions describe noble ancestors, migrations, sacred agreements, and dynastic founders. But oral memory does not preserve chronology in the same way as a written archive. Archaeological evidence suggests that complex settlements and extensive exchange networks existed in the Western Sahel before Ghana reaches its greatest strength. Some scholars place the kingdom's early formation in the first millennium CE, while others argue that its recognizable imperial power develops later. No single date fully captures the transformation. Ghana emerges gradually, then becomes visible to outsiders only after it is already formidable. Its geographical position is excellent but not effortless. The core territory lies north of the richest savanna farming zones and south of the most difficult Saharan routes. Rainfall is limited and variable, so rulers cannot depend on agriculture alone. Yet the land supports millet, sorghum, livestock, and enough settlement to maintain a political centre. From here, royal authority can reach east and west along Sahelian corridors, while influencing routes that lead north toward desert trading towns and south toward the goldfields. Those goldfields are especially important. The kingdom does not appear to control every mine directly. Many sources of gold lie beyond the royal heartland in regions associated with Bambouk and other zones near the upper Senegal and Niger systems. Local miners and traders recover the metal and move it northward through several stages. Ghana's rulers benefit by controlling the routes, markets, and borders through which that gold must pass. They understand that the location of the mines may matter less than the ability to regulate access to them. Political power also rests on military strength. A state collecting taxes from wealthy caravans becomes an attractive target, so trade must be defended. Ghana's rulers maintain armed forces capable of protecting important settlements, discouraging raids and compelling tribute from neighboring communities. Later, Arabic accounts describe enormous armies, including large numbers of archers, although such figures are probably exaggerated. Medieval writers often use impressive numbers to communicate power rather than provide precise military records. Even so, the kingdom clearly possesses enough force to make its authority credible over a broad region. Ironworking contributes to that strength. West African metalworkers have produced iron tools and weapons for centuries before Ghana's height. Iron axes help clear fields. Hoes support agriculture. Spearheads and arrow points equip soldiers and hunters. Blacksmiths occupy an important and sometimes socially distinctive position, because their work transforms stone-like ore into objects essential for survival and war. In many societies, that transformation carries practical, symbolic, and even spiritual significance. Control over skilled metalworkers therefore strengthens both the economy and the prestige of rulers. The kingdom's authority is probably not uniform. Near the royal centre, officials can supervise markets and enforce decisions directly. Farther away, local leaders may retain considerable independence so long as they provide tribute, military assistance, or safe passage. This flexible arrangement allows Ghana to influence a large territory without building a modern-style bureaucracy in every village. The empire is less a single, tightly administered bloc than a network of loyalties organized around a powerful court. Tribute arrives in many forms. Grain feeds the capital and the army. Livestock supplies meat, hides, and status. Gold enriches the treasury. Captives taken in warfare may become servants, agricultural workers, soldiers, or commodities in long-distance trade. Enslavement is part of the political economy, as it is in many societies of the period, though the surviving evidence rarely reveals the lives of the individuals caught within it. Their labour supports the wealth described by foreign observers, even when those observers pay more attention to kings' merchants and precious metals. As Ghana grows, the ruler's role becomes more than military. He stands at the centre of a sacred political order. Later, Soninka traditions describe the prosperity of Ouagadougou as connected to a pact involving a serpent spirit known as Bida. Versions differ, but the story often links royal legitimacy and the kingdom's abundance to a recurring sacrifice. Eventually the pact is broken, and disaster follows. This is not a literal historical account of Ghana's foundation or decline, but it preserves something important about how communities understand power. Wealth is not accidental, and kingship carries obligations to forces greater than the ruler himself. Such traditions also warn that prosperity can be withdrawn. A kingdom that depends on trade, rainfall, tribute, and political loyalty is powerful but vulnerable. Every caravan must arrive safely. Every subject ruler must remain cooperative. Every market must appear more secure and profitable than competing routes. The machinery of empire is impressive precisely because so many moving parts must continue working together. By the 9th and 10th centuries outside, writers describe Ghana as one of the strongest states south of the Sahara. Its ruler commands respect, its markets attract merchants, and its influence reaches across the western Sahel. Gold flows through its hands toward the north. Salt moves south under its protection. Around the royal court, wealth accumulates in forms that travellers remember long after the details have blurred. Fine clothing ornaments, armed retainers, ceremonial displays, and animals decorated with gold. Yet Ghana's greatest achievement is not the possession of treasure. It is the creation of order around movement. The kingdom turns scattered exchange into a system and geography into policy. The desert remains dangerous, the goldfields remain distant, and the evidence remains incomplete. But between them stands a state strong enough to make merchants accept its rules. The middle ground has become an empire. The ruler at the centre of Ghana's system does not need to descend into a salt mine or stand beside a river washing gold from the soil. His wealth comes from controlling the spaces between those places. Every loaded camel that enters the kingdom, every merchant who leaves with precious metal, every caravan seeking protection, and every market operating under royal authority becomes part of a carefully managed flow. The king's true resource is not salt or gold alone. It is passage. Foreign accounts describe taxes collected on goods entering and leaving the kingdom. Salt is taxed when it arrives from the north, and gold may be taxed as it moves outward. Other commodities are assessed as well, including copper, cloth, livestock, and manufactured objects. The exact rates are uncertain, and they almost certainly change over time, but the principle is clear. Ghana profits repeatedly from goods it does not necessarily produce. The same slab of salt may generate revenue at several points before reaching its final buyer, while a small quantity of gold can support official soldiers and the royal court without ever remaining permanently in the king's possession. This arrangement depends on trust backed by force. Merchants must believe that taxes will buy something useful: safe roads, protected markets, predictable rules, and access to customers. If royal demands become arbitrary, traders can search for another route. If authority weakens, raiders can make the journey too dangerous to justify. Ghana's rulers therefore balance extraction with protection. They collect wealth from commerce while ensuring that commerce continues. At important crossings and market settlements, officials likely inspect cargoes, supervise weighing, resolve disputes, and record obligations through memory or writing. Muslim merchants from North Africa increasingly bring written contracts, commercial arithmetic, and legal traditions with them, though local systems of agreement remain equally important. A trader may depend on interpreters and brokers who understand both the foreign merchant community and the expectations of the royal administration. These intermediaries make the kingdom function quietly, translating not only words but measurements, values, customs, and risks. Weights are especially important in the gold trade. Gold dust can be divided into tiny quantities, making accurate measurement essential. Later, West African trading systems become famous for elaborate sets of weights, but the precise forms used during Ghana's height are not fully known. What survives in the record suggests that merchants and officials employ recognized standards, even if those standards vary between regions. A dishonest scale can destroy confidence faster than a hostile army, so rulers have a strong reason to regulate exchange. The king's control over gold appears to extend beyond taxation. A widely repeated account claims that all large nuggets belong to the ruler, while ordinary people may trade in gold dust. This policy, if accurately reported, serves several purposes. It reserves spectacular pieces for the royal treasury, prevents too much concentrated wealth from circulating among rivals, and may help maintain the value of gold by limiting supply. Scholars still debate how consistently such a rule was enforced, and whether outside observers understood it correctly, but the idea fits a broader pattern. The king seeks to control the most politically powerful forms of wealth without stopping everyday trade. Gold is not valuable only because foreign markets desire it. Within the kingdom, it becomes a language of authority. It appears in ornaments, sword fittings, ceremonial objects, horse equipment, and royal display. The ruler's body and surroundings communicate access to resources beyond the reach of ordinary households. Gold does not merely decorate power, it makes power visible. The court itself becomes a theatre in which political order is performed. Later descriptions speak of the king receiving visitors beneath an elaborate pavilion, surrounded by armed guards, officials, noblemen, and richly adorned animals. Dogs may wear collars of precious metal. Horses display expensive equipment. Visitors approach according to strict ritual. Some details may be sharpened by the amazement of foreign writers, but the underlying purpose is familiar across many monarchies. Anyone entering the royal presence must understand immediately that the king stands above local chiefs and ordinary merchants. Ceremony also solves a practical problem. Ghana governs communities with different customs and degrees of loyalty. A ruler cannot personally supervise every distant settlement. Instead, he creates a political center, so prestigious that subordinate leaders seek recognition from it. Tribute gift exchange, marriage alliances, and public rituals bind regional elites to the court. A chief may retain authority over his own people, while acknowledging the superior status of Ghana's king. Military power supports this arrangement. Royal soldiers guard strategic routes and discourage local rulers from withholding tribute. Archers are often emphasized in descriptions of Ghana's forces, and bows are well suited to warfare across the Sahelian landscape. Cavalry also carries prestige and tactical value, though maintaining horses in regions affected by heat disease and limited fodder can be expensive. The ability to field mounted warriors therefore signals access to wealth and long-distance exchange. The army is not simply a defensive institution. Expansion brings new tributaries, captives, livestock, and access to commercial corridors. Yet conquest alone cannot sustain the kingdom. A devastated market produces no taxes, and a depopulated route carries no caravans. Ghana's rulers need enough violence to command obedience, but enough restraint to preserve the economy beneath it. That balance is never permanent. Salt illustrates the tension particularly well. The king does not need to own the northern mines, but he must prevent rivals from bypassing his markets. He may rely on alliances with desert communities, agreements with caravan leaders, and control of wells or southern terminals. Traders who accept royal protection enter a system that rewards cooperation. Those who attempt to evade taxes risk confiscation, exclusion, or attack. Still, the kingdom's reach has limits. The Sahara is too vast to seal completely, and alternative paths always exist. Smuggling is almost certain, though rarely visible in written sources. Local rulers may underreport tribute. Officials may take private payments. Merchants may conceal valuable goods within ordinary cargo. No single explanation fully accounts for how effectively Ghana manages these problems, but its longevity suggests that the system works well enough for generations. The king's greatest strength is therefore also his greatest vulnerability. His authority depends on movement he cannot fully control. Gold must continue to travel north. Salt must continue to travel south. Merchants must prefer his roads, and subject communities must believe resistance is more costly than obedience. As long as these conditions hold, Ghana can become immensely wealthy without possessing the source of every treasure it taxes. Across the kingdom, this wealth begins to reshape daily life. Markets grow larger, crafts become more specialized. Settlements attract strangers. Royal storehouses fill with goods from environments most subjects will never see. The empire's power appears solid, but beneath the ceremony lies a delicate truth. The throne stands not upon a mine, but upon a road. Long before a caravan reaches Ghana's markets, it must survive the desert that makes those markets valuable. The journey begins with preparation measured in weeks or months. Merchants gather salt cloth, copper goods, beads, dried food, leather water bags, ropes, saddles, and spare equipment. Camel owners negotiate prices. Guides are chosen not for bravery alone, but for memory, judgment, and relationships, with the communities controlling wells and grazing grounds. A single mistake made before departure can become fatal hundreds of kilometers later, where nothing can be replaced, and no settlement lies close enough to offer help. Caravans rarely move as one perfectly ordered line. Smaller groups gather near an oasis or commercial town, waiting until numbers provide safety. Merchants may travel beside strangers whose interests temporarily align with their own. Some own the goods they carry. Others transport cargo for investors who remain far away. A successful merchant may divide his wealth among several caravans, knowing that bandits, disease, thirst, or political conflict could destroy an entire expedition. Commerce across the Sahara rewards confidence, but it also encourages caution. Departure often comes before sunrise. During the coolest hours, the camels cover ground steadily, their broad feet pressing into sand and gravel. As the sun rises, the landscape changes colour but offers little shelter. Some routes cross great dune fields, though much of the Sahara consists of stone plains, dry valleys, low ridges and barren plateaus. These surfaces can be harder on animals than soft sand. Sharp rock cuts feet. Heat radiates upward. Wind drives dust into eyes, food and clothing. The animals carry perhaps 100 kilograms or more depending on conditions, breed route and available water. Salt slabs are especially difficult because their weight cannot be reduced without sacrificing profit. Loads must be balanced carefully on both sides of the saddle. An uneven pack exhausts the camel and creates sores that may become infected. Drivers inspect ropes and skin repeatedly because a small injury early in the crossing can make an animal useless before the caravan reaches its destination. Water governs everything. A guide must know not simply where wells exist, but whether they are likely to contain enough for hundreds of people and animals. Some are deep shafts requiring ropes and containers. Others are temporary pools left by rare rain. A well may already be crowded by another caravan. It may have been damaged during conflict, contaminated by a dead animal, or filled with drifting sand. The evidence remains incomplete, but surviving accounts and later desert practice show that knowledge of water sources is among the most closely guarded forms of expertise. Camels can endure dehydration better than horses or cattle, yet they are not invincible. Their famous tolerance does not remove the need for planning. After drinking deeply, an animal may travel for days, but heat load pace and physical condition determine how long it can continue. Merchants sometimes carry water not only for themselves but for the camels during the most difficult stretches. That water adds weight, forcing the caravan to carry the substance required to carry everything else. At midday, movement may slow or stop. People gather beneath cloth shelters or beside the narrow shadow of a loaded animal. Food is simple: grain preparations, dates, dried meat, or whatever can survive without spoiling. Firewood is scarce, so fuel may include thorn branches or dried animal dung collected at previous stopping places. Every object has value because every object has been carried. Waste becomes a luxury the caravan cannot afford. Navigation is another kind of survival. During clear nights, experienced travelers use stars to maintain direction. By day, they recognize landforms that appear meaningless to an outsider. The angle of a ridge, the texture of the ground, the color of distant stone. Wind patterns and old tracks offer clues, but both can deceive. Sandstorms erase routes, scatter animals, and reduce visibility to a few steps. People tie themselves to companions or kneel beside camels until the worst passes. A storm may last hours, leaving the landscape rearranged and familiar markers concealed. Not every danger comes from nature. Armed groups may demand tolls for passage through territory they consider their own. Some agreements are stable and understood by both sides. Others are little more than payments made under threat. Caravan leaders negotiate with pastoral communities whose control over wells gives them real authority, even when distant kings claim the same land. A guide with family or trading connections can make the difference between safe passage and violence. Raiding is an accepted risk. Salt textiles, metal animals, and captives all have value. Guards travel with wealthier caravans, but protection increases costs and cannot guarantee safety. A large caravan is harder to attack, yet also easier to detect and slower to maneuver. A small group moves quietly, but is vulnerable if discovered. Merchants must constantly balance speed, security, and the needs of the animals. The dead sometimes remain beside the route. Burial may be shallow where the ground is hard, and sudden loss can force survivors onward before rituals are complete. Abandoned cargo, broken jars, animal bones, and simple graves mark the desert's hidden archaeology. Many traces disappear beneath sand or are scattered by wind, leaving no record of the individuals who never reached the market. What survives in written sources usually celebrates successful journeys, while failure vanishes almost completely. Yet caravans continue because the rewards are enormous. Salt purchased near a mine rises in value with every stage southward. North African cloth copper and manufactured goods find buyers in the Sahel. Gold carried back across the desert may enter Mediterranean and Middle Eastern economies, where it supports coinage, luxury production, and political power. The travellers crossing the Sahara participate in a system far larger than any single kingdom, even if most never see its distant ends. Caravans also carry ideas. Muslim merchants bring religious practices, literacy, legal concepts, and news from cities across North Africa. Stories of rulers and wars travel south. Information about harvests, prices, and political instability travels north. A caravan arriving after weeks of silence does more than unload goods. It reconnects worlds. As the travellers approach the Sahel, the signs of life return gradually. Sparse grazing appears. Wells become more frequent. Thorn trees rise from the horizon. Herds and fields replace the emptiness. The animals are thinner, the water bags lighter, and some members of the caravan may be missing. Ahead lie royal officials, market taxes, negotiations, and the possibility of profit. Behind lies the desert, which has already collected its share. When the caravan finally reaches the kingdom's great commercial centre, the desert does not simply end. It gives way to movement. Camels crowd the approaches, their loads dusty and reduced by weeks of travel. Herds are driven toward watering places. Porters carry salt slabs from one storage area to another. Traders inspect leather bags of grain, bundles of cloth copper objects, beads, and gold dust, measured in quantities small enough to disappear beneath a fingernail. After the vast silence of the Sahara, the city feels almost unnaturally alive. This place is usually identified with Koumbi Saleh, an archaeological site in southeastern Mauritania that many scholars connect to the capital described by medieval Arabic writers. The identification is widely accepted but not absolutely certain. No surviving inscription announces that this was the royal city of Ghana, and the evidence remains incomplete. What archaeology does reveal is a large and sophisticated settlement, positioned near the old commercial corridors between the Sahara and the western Sahel. Its stone buildings, streets, wells, courtyards, and imported goods fit the image of a major centre shaped by long-distance trade. Medieval descriptions suggest that Ghana's capital is not one city in the modern sense, but two major urban zones separated by open ground. One is associated with Muslim merchants and contains several mosques. The other is the royal settlement, where the king, his court, sacred places, and traditional religious authorities reside. The distance between them may have been several kilometers, with smaller habitations spread through the landscape. Archaeology at Koumbi Saleh has most clearly exposed the merchant quarter, while the exact position and character of the royal centre remain uncertain. This separation is revealing. Muslim traders are essential to the kingdom's economy, but they are not the kingdom's rulers. They bring commercial connections reaching across North Africa and beyond, along with Arabic literacy, Islamic law, and religious institutions. The Soninka court maintains its own beliefs and rituals rooted in the land and in older ideas of sacred kingship. Rather than forcing one community to dissolve into the other, the capital allows different systems to exist side by side. The merchant quarter contains densely arranged stone buildings constructed from local materials. Some structures have multiple rooms grouped around internal courtyards. Narrow streets run between walls, creating shaded passageways during the hottest part of the day. Storage rooms hold valuable goods. Workshops support metalworking, textile production, food preparation, and repair. Wells are essential because a city serving caravans must provide water, not only for residents but for large numbers of animals and temporary visitors. One lesser-known detail is that some houses appear surprisingly substantial, with stone masonry and carefully organized interiors. This challenges the old assumption that urban life south of the Sahara depended on outside influence or arrived late. The city does not imitate a North African settlement in every respect. It combines local building traditions with forms adapted to trade climate and the needs of a mixed population. Its growth reflects African political organization and commercial demand, not the accidental presence of foreign merchants. The mosques described by writers and identified through archaeology anchor the Muslim community. Their exact number at any one time is uncertain, but religious buildings provide places for prayer, teaching, and social organization. Literacy in Arabic becomes useful well beyond worship. Merchants can record debts, partnerships, quantities, and correspondence. Written agreements allow investments to operate across long distances, although trust still depends heavily on family connections and personal reputation. The market itself is where all these worlds meet. Language differences fill the air. Soninka Berber languages, Arabic, and other regional tongues are heard among brokers and travelers. A merchant arriving from the north may not negotiate directly with the producer of southern gold. Several intermediaries stand between them, each knowing a different stretch of the route. Translators do more than replace one word with another. They explain acceptable prices, political obligations, measures taboos, and the consequences of offending an official or local patron. Salt arrives in heavy slabs, but it rarely leaves the market unchanged. Some pieces are sold intact to traders continuing south. Others are broken into smaller units. The surface is examined for quality, because salt can contain impurities or suffer damage during transport. Gold is tested, weighed, and divided. Copper cloth beads and horses attract buyers with different needs. Grain and livestock flow toward the urban population, while imported luxuries move toward the royal court and regional elites. The city also depends on labor that foreign accounts barely notice. Water must be drawn, animals must be fed and cleaned, grain must be ground, food must be cooked for residents and strangers, loads must be lifted, guarded, recorded, and redistributed. Enslaved people, servants, craftsmen, women, children, and seasonal workers all contribute to the functioning of the capital, yet most remain invisible in surviving descriptions. The grandeur of trade rests upon thousands of repetitive tasks performed beyond the attention of kings and chroniclers. Beyond the merchant district lies the royal world, remembered through accounts of guarded compounds, ceremonial buildings, sacred groves, and elite residences. The king's settlement may have been less densely built but more politically charged. Foreign visitors enter according to protocol. Officials control access. Tribute and gifts are displayed. The ruler receives merchants and emissaries surrounded by symbols of wealth, armed retainers and advisors. There is also a more mysterious boundary. Some accounts describe a sacred grove where royal tombs and religious structures are hidden from outsiders. Whether every detail is accurate cannot be confirmed, but the description suggests that political authority is tied to restricted places and ancestral power. The royal centre is not merely an administrative headquarters. It is a sacred landscape whose meanings are not available to every visitor. This division between merchant city and royal city may also protect the kingdom's independence. Foreign traders are welcomed, taxed, and allowed to build institutions, but they remain physically separated from the deepest rituals of government. The king benefits from their wealth and knowledge without surrendering the symbolic heart of the state. Islam has a recognized place, yet it does not initially absorb the throne. At sunset, the city changes rhythm. Caravan animals kneel among their loads. Fires appear in courtyards. Calls to prayer rise from the merchant quarter, while older ceremonies continue nearer the royal settlement. Traders calculate profits and losses. Guards take position beside warehouses. Somewhere a newly arrived slab of salt is exchanged again, its price increased by the desert behind it. Somewhere else gold dust begins the first stage of its journey north. Koumbi Saleh stands because separation and connection are held in careful balance. Desert and savannah, foreign merchant and local ruler, written contract and oral oath, mosque and sacred grove, all occupy the same commercial landscape. The city is not simply where trade happens, it is where Ghana turns difference into wealth, without allowing difference to break the kingdom apart. Gold leaves the southern lands in tiny quantities, but it carries an enormous silence with it. North African merchants know that the metal comes from regions beyond Ghana's immediate heartland, yet the exact sources remain difficult for outsiders to locate. Miners work along rivers in shallow pits, and in soils where gold has accumulated over immense spans of time. Local traders carry the metal northward through chains of exchange, but the people who finally meet desert merchants may be several steps removed from those who first recovered it. Distance protects the goldfields, and secrecy protects them even more. Foreign writers are fascinated by this hidden geography. They describe a land rich in gold but difficult to penetrate, where rulers and merchants guard information about production. The result is one of the most enduring stories associated with West African trade, the so-called silent exchange, sometimes known as dumb barter. In its most dramatic form, merchants arrive at a designated place and lay out goods, especially salt cloth or metal objects. They withdraw, and unseen gold traders approach to place an amount of gold beside the merchandise. The first group returns, inspects the offer, and either accepts it or leaves the goods in place to demand more. No words are spoken, no faces clearly seen, and the exchange continues until both sides are satisfied. The story is striking because it seems to transform trade into ritual. Two groups conduct business without conversation, apparently separated by language suspicion or deliberate secrecy. It has been repeated in histories for centuries, often presented as a standard feature of Ghana's economy. Yet scholars still debate how literally it should be understood. The surviving accounts were written by outsiders, some of whom never visited the region they described. They gathered information from merchants, earlier texts and oral reports that may have passed through many retellings. There are several possible explanations for the tradition. One is practical. Traders who do not share a common language can still exchange goods through gestures, weighing and repeated offers. Silence may reduce misunderstanding and avoid conflict. Another explanation is political. Gold-producing communities may wish to prevent foreign merchants from learning the locations of mines or establishing direct relationships with miners. By controlling contact, intermediaries preserve their own profits and protect the communities supplying the metal. Fear of disease has also been suggested. Communities isolated from one another may limit direct contact during outbreaks, or because they regard outsiders as dangerous. Ritual taboos could produce similar restrictions. In some societies, certain resources are surrounded by sacred rules, and miners or traders may avoid particular forms of contact while handling them. The evidence remains incomplete, however, and no single explanation fully accounts for every version of the story. It is also possible that the silence is exaggerated. Negotiations may have occurred through brokers who were invisible to later observers. Traders may have used established signals, marked quantities, or interpreters, while outsiders understood the process only partially. A controlled market with restricted access could easily become in distant retelling a mysterious clearing where unseen people exchange gold without speaking. Medieval geography often mixes careful observation with wonder, especially when describing lands far beyond the writer's direct experience. The attraction of the story lies partly in what it suggests about power. If gold producers remain, northern merchants cannot bypass Ghana's commercial system. They must depend on local intermediaries, royal officials, and trusted market networks. Knowledge becomes a protected resource. The location of a mine may be as valuable as the gold itself because anyone who controls that knowledge can decide who buys, who sells, and who collects profit between the two. Ghana's rulers have strong reasons to preserve this distance. Direct contact between foreign merchants and southern miners could weaken royal taxation and allow rival routes to emerge. The king does not need to know every mining pit personally, but he benefits when access remains limited and gold enters the market through channels he can monitor. Secrecy therefore serves economic security. It keeps the metal moving while preventing outsiders from controlling its source. The goldfields themselves are probably less spectacular than distant imagination suggests. Gold is often recovered in dust flakes or small nuggets rather than extracted from vast glittering chambers. Miners wash sediment in river valleys, dig into old stream beds, or work shallow deposits during suitable seasons. The labor is repetitive and uncertain. Many hours may produce almost nothing, yet the metal does not corrode, and even a small amount can be carried easily and traded for goods far heavier than itself. Seasonality matters. Heavy rains can make mining difficult or alter river conditions, while dry periods expose deposits and allow easier movement. Agricultural communities may divide labor between farming and mining, rather than maintaining a permanent specialized workforce. Gold production therefore responds to rainfall, harvest demands, political security, and local authority. Foreign buyers waiting far to the north may see only the final supply, not the environmental decisions behind it. The royal monopoly on large nuggets adds another layer of mystery. Medieval accounts state that substantial pieces of gold are reserved for the king while traders handle gold dust. This may help explain why most gold circulates in small measured quantities. Large nuggets carry political as well as material value. They are rare, impressive, and difficult to conceal. By claiming them, the ruler reinforces the idea that exceptional wealth belongs naturally to the throne. Whether this rule is enforced everywhere is uncertain. Ghana's influence over distant mining regions may be indirect, and local leaders probably retain considerable control. The policy may apply mainly within markets governed closely by royal officials. It may also have been an ideal principle reported more consistently than it was practiced. Smuggling, private deals, and concealed nuggets almost certainly exist wherever a state attempts to regulate valuable commodities. Gold dust requires elaborate habits of trust. It must be weighed, tested, and protected from substitution. Fine metal can be mixed with sand or inferior material. A merchant may rub it, heat it, or rely on experienced specialists to judge quality. Small leather bags, containers, and scales become essential tools. Wealth that can purchase an animal, a weapon, or a shipment of cloth may occupy less space than a handful of grain. This compactness helps gold move across enormous distances. After leaving Ghana's markets, it travels north through desert towns and onward toward Mediterranean commercial centers. Some enters coinage, some becomes jewelry, religious decoration, or royal treasure. The person wearing it in a distant court may know nothing of the river valley where it was first recovered, the farmers who mined it between seasons, or the officials who taxed it along the way. The silence surrounding gold is therefore not emptiness. It is a structure built from guarded knowledge, layered exchange, political interest, and foreign misunderstanding. What survives in the record suggests that secrecy was real, even if the perfectly wordless trade described by later writers was not universal. Ghana's wealth depends partly on what merchants can see in its markets, but also on what they are never allowed to see beyond them. If gold enters the trade wrapped in secrecy, salt begins in brutal openness. There is little mystery about where it comes from once a traveller reaches the mining settlements. The ground itself reveals pale layers beneath the desert mineral beds left by vanished seas and ancient basins. What is difficult is not finding the salt, but surviving long enough to cut it, shape it, and send it away. At the edge of permanent human habitation, settlements grow around deposits that can sustain empires while barely sustaining the workers who extract them. The most famous of these places is Tagaza, far north of the Sahel in what is now Mali. Tagaza becomes especially prominent during the later Mali and Songhai empires after Ghana's greatest period, so it should not be imagined as the single mine feeding Ghana throughout its history. Earlier commerce also draws salt from deposits and coastal sources elsewhere, including Saharan zones such as Aulil and Ijil. Yet Tagaza offers the clearest surviving picture of the strange mining world upon which the entire salt economy depends. It shows the extreme conditions that similar desert sources impose on labourers and merchants across generations. There are almost no fields at Tagaza, no dependable pasture, and little natural material for construction. Salt is so abundant that slabs of it are reportedly used in the walls of buildings. Roofs must be made from imported materials or whatever can be carried across the desert. Water is scarce and often unpleasant to drink. Food arrives by caravan, especially grain, and dates from distant oases and Sahelian markets. A delay in supplies is not merely inconvenient, it threatens the settlement with starvation. The miners descend into pits or work exposed mineral layers, cutting the deposits with iron tools. They separate blocks from the bed, trim them into manageable shapes, and prepare them for transport. The work is physically punishing. Salt dust enters wounds, eyes, and lungs. Heat reflects from the ground. Tools break against compact mineral. A slab that fractures incorrectly loses value, though the broken pieces may still be sold in smaller markets. Each successful block represents not only the salt itself, but the food, water, metal, labour, and animal power required to remove it. Some workers are free labourers tied to caravan merchants or local authorities. Others are enslaved people compelled to remain in a place from which escape is nearly impossible. The desert itself acts as a wall. A person fleeing without animals, water guides, or knowledge of the wells is unlikely to reach another settlement. Written accounts tend to describe the mines as curiosities or sources of royal wealth, but behind those descriptions lie lives shaped by coercion, isolation, and repetitive danger. The population changes with the rhythm of trade. During active periods, miners, overseers, camel drivers, guards, merchants, and suppliers crowd the settlement. When caravans leave, the place becomes quieter and more vulnerable. Almost everything required for daily life has arrived on the backs of animals. Cloth, timber, pottery, tools, grain, and even replacement ropes must be imported. Salt is the only resource the settlement possesses in abundance, and salt cannot be eaten as food or burned as fuel. Once cut, the slabs are stacked and assigned to caravans. Loading demands precision. A camel must carry balanced weight on both sides, and the sharp edges of a block can damage rope leather or skin. Salt attracts moisture when conditions allow and can crumble under repeated impact. Merchants therefore lose part of their cargo simply through travel. By the time a slab reaches the southern markets, it may be smaller than when it left the mine, which contributes to its rising price. The value of the load increases with every kilometre. Near the deposit, salt is plentiful enough to serve as building material. Farther south, it becomes a strategic commodity. This transformation demonstrates that rarity alone does not determine price. Distance, danger, labor, and political control matter just as much. The southern buyer pays not merely for a mineral block, but for every well reached safely, every toll negotiated, every animal fed, and every person who survives the crossing. Caravan merchants may exchange grain and other necessities directly for salt at the mining center. The relationship is almost perfectly dependent. The miners cannot live without imported food, while the merchants cannot profit without the miners' labor. Yet the balance of power is unequal. Those who control transport and supplies can influence prices and working conditions. A settlement cut off from grain has little room to negotiate. Desert powers also compete to control access. Berber confederations, oasis communities, local chiefs and imperial authorities may all claim rights over mines or routes. A distant Sahelian ruler does not always occupy the extraction site directly. Instead, he may tax the salt when it reaches his territory, negotiate with the groups controlling the northern approaches, or send officials and military forces when conditions allow. Political control shifts over time because the mines are valuable but difficult to hold. The Kingdom of Ghana benefits from this system without mastering every stage of it. Its rulers dominate southern markets and corridors while desert communities manage much of the dangerous northern movement. Neither side can easily replace the other. The caravans need grain customers and political security in the Sahel. Ghana needs salt camels and guides from the Sahara. Trade creates dependence between societies that may remain culturally and politically distinct. Salt also moves beyond wealthy urban markets. It is divided repeatedly as it travels south. Large slabs become smaller blocks, then pieces suitable for households or local exchange. Some reaches cattle herders who use it for themselves and their animals. Some supports fish preservation along rivers. Some enters elite stores or military supplies. Its journey does not end at the royal capital. It continues through networks of market women, village traders, pastoral communities, and regional brokers rarely mentioned in chronicles. Archaeology struggles to reconstruct this movement because salt usually disappears through use or exposure. Gold objects may survive in graves or treasuries, but consumed salt leaves little visible trace. Mining pits, caravan debris, imported pottery, and settlement remains provide indirect evidence. Scholars still debate the precise importance of individual sources during different centuries, and shifting climate or politics may redirect trade from one deposit to another. The route remembered in a later account may not be the route used during Ghana's early rise, yet the larger pattern remains clear. At one end of the network, people work in a landscape where walls can be made from salt because almost nothing else exists. At the other, buyers break those same walls into precious fragments. Between them, kingdoms collect taxes, merchants calculate risks, and caravans cross the emptiness. The empire's richest trade begins not in a glittering treasury, but in a pit beneath a white burning desert, where every block removed from the earth carries civilization farther south. The wealth gathered from salt and gold does not remain motionless inside the royal treasury. It spreads outward through the kingdom, supporting the people and institutions that make Ghana's authority possible. Every tax collected from a caravan can become grain for soldiers, gifts for allied chiefs, payment for officials, decoration for ceremonies, or supplies for a city whose population depends on food arriving from the surrounding countryside. The court may appear to foreign visitors as a place of dazzling display, but behind that display stands a system of redistribution. Wealth must be seen, shared, and transformed into loyalty, or it risks becoming nothing more than treasure waiting to be stolen. At the center of this system is the king's household, which is larger than a private family. It includes relatives, advisors, guards, servants, religious specialists, craftsmen, messengers, and political dependents. Some live permanently near the ruler. Others arrive for ceremonies, negotiations, tribute payments, or legal decisions. Feeding them requires careful organization. Herds supply meat and milk. Farmers deliver millet and sorghum. Hunters bring game. Merchants provide salt dates, cloth, and imported luxuries. The court consumes wealth, but it also creates demand that draws producers and traders toward the capital. Royal generosity is politically useful. A king who gives horses cloth, gold ornaments, weapons, or livestock demonstrates that prosperity flows through him. Gifts reward service and bind recipients to the throne. A regional chief who receives visible signs of royal favor gains prestige among his own followers, but the gift also reminds everyone where that prestige originates. In this way, wealth becomes a chain of obligation. The ruler gives the recipient oaths loyalty, and political hierarchy is reinforced without constant warfare. Tribute follows the opposite direction. Subject communities send grain, livestock, metals, captives, and specialized goods toward the royal center. Some payments are regular, others may be demanded after military defeat or during major ceremonies. The form of tribute depends on what each region can produce. Agricultural districts supply food. Pastoral communities provide animals. Areas linked to gold or copper trade contribute valuable material. The kingdom does not force every province into one identical economic role. It draws strength from ecological difference. Officials are needed to manage these flows, though their names and titles are poorly preserved. They likely supervise markets, collect levies, organize royal storehouses, carry messages, and represent the king in distant settlements. Some may belong to powerful families whose loyalty is secured through marriage or appointment. Others may be specialists valued for literacy, commercial knowledge, or military skill. The evidence remains incomplete, but a state capable of taxing long-distance trade over generations cannot operate through royal presence alone. Messengers connect the center to the wider realm. They travel along routes that are dangerous for the same reasons caravans are dangerous: distance, uncertain water-shifting alliances, and seasonal conditions. Yet political authority depends on speed. News of rebellion, invasion, caravan losses, or failed harvests must reach the court before the situation becomes irreversible. Horses may carry urgent messages where conditions allow, while runners and relay systems probably serve shorter distances. Information is another commodity the kingdom must move efficiently. The army consumes a large share of royal resources. Soldiers require food, weapons, clothing, and compensation. Horses are especially expensive because they need fodder, water equipment, and skilled care. In parts of West Africa, disease limits horse survival, which can make healthy animals imported from drier northern regions particularly valuable. Cavalry therefore becomes both a military asset and a visible sign of wealth. A mounted warrior represents not only one fighter but an entire supply system supporting him. Archers form another crucial component. Bows can be produced locally, and trained archers operate effectively across open grassland and broken Sahelian terrain. Later writers describe Ghana's armies in enormous numbers, sometimes claiming that the king could summon tens of thousands of troops. Such figures should be treated cautiously. Medieval authors often inflate military totals, and no surviving administrative record confirms them. What survives in the record suggests a substantial force, but not one whose exact size can be known. Weapons are only one product of the kingdom's skilled craftsmen. Smiths forge spearheads, knives, agricultural tools, and fittings for horses. Leatherworkers produce saddles, shields, water bags, and cases. Weavers create cloth for ordinary use and elite display. Potters supply vessels for cooking, storage, and trade. goldsmiths transform small amounts of precious metal into objects far more politically powerful than raw dust. A carefully worked ornament can identify rank, commemorate an alliance, or turn the king's appearance into a statement of supernatural authority. One surprising feature of royal wealth is how much of it may remain mobile. Livestock can be driven away from danger. Gold can be carried in small containers. Cloth weapons and precious objects can travel with the court. In a region where political centres may shift and permanent stone monuments are less central than in some other empires, movable wealth offers flexibility. The kingdom's power is not locked entirely inside palaces. It travels with people, animals, and relationships. This helps explain why archaeology reveals less royal grandeur than written descriptions might lead one to expect. Stone merchant houses survive at Koumbi Saleh, but much of the royal settlement may have used earth timber and organic materials that deteriorate more quickly. Ceremonial spaces could be impressive without being built to endure for 1,000 years. Wealth worn on bodies presented as gifts or redistributed through tribute leaves a different archaeological signature from wealth sealed inside monumental tombs. The court also serves as a place of judgment. Merchants bring disputes over debt, stolen goods, or broken agreements. Local leaders seek decisions in conflicts over tribute land or succession. The king's ability to resolve such disputes strengthens his position as guardian of order. Justice is not necessarily equal or impersonal, but predictable authority is valuable in a commercial society. Traders prefer a powerful court capable of enforcing agreements to a route where every quarrel becomes private violence. Ceremony turns these practical functions into sacred authority. The ruler appears surrounded by guards, ornaments, musicians, officials, and symbols of ancestral power. Access is controlled. Visitors follow rituals of approach. The purpose is not simple vanity. A king ruling through layered loyalties must repeatedly make hierarchy visible. The court reminds merchants that taxes belong to an established order, reminds chiefs that their rank depends on royal recognition, and reminds soldiers that they serve something larger than a single household. Still, prosperity is never evenly shared. The same trade that enriches the court also supports systems of enslavement, forced labor, and tribute extracted from communities with little influence over royal policy. Captives may work in households, fields, mines, or military service. Farmers must produce surpluses beyond their own needs. Porters carry goods that make others wealthy. Foreign observers admire gold-covered weapons and decorated animals, but rarely describe the cost borne by those outside the ceremonial centre. The court's brilliance therefore contains a contradiction. It demonstrates the kingdom's ability to create stability, reward service, and protect trade, yet it also reveals how power concentrates the labour of many people into the hands of a few. No single explanation fully accounts for how subjects understood this arrangement. Some may have viewed tribute as a legitimate obligation within a sacred political order. Others likely experienced it as pressure backed by force. As long as caravans continue to arrive, the system can sustain itself. Taxes fill storehouses. Storehouses feed soldiers. Soldiers defend routes. Safe routes attract merchants, and merchants generate more taxes. Around the king, this cycle takes visible form in gold, horses, weapons, cloth, and ceremony. But the wealth behind the royal court is never merely decoration. It is the fuel of government, the price of loyalty, and the fragile mechanism holding a vast commercial kingdom together. Religion travels with trade, but it does not cross the Sahara as a conquering army at first. It arrives in habits repeated quietly from one caravan stop to another, merchants washing before prayer, reciting verses at dawn, settling debts according to familiar legal principles, and marking time by a calendar shared with distant cities. by the time Ghana reaches the height of its power, Islam is already deeply established across much of North Africa. Muslim traders moving south bring more than goods. They carry a religious and intellectual world extending from the Atlantic coast to Egypt, Arabia, and lands far beyond. The first people in Ghana to adopt Islam in significant numbers are probably not the kings or the majority of rural communities, but merchants, interpreters, scribes, and officials whose work depends on long-distance connections. For them, conversion can be a matter of conviction, community, and practical advantage at the same time. A Muslim trader arriving from the north can pray beside local believers, find partners who recognize similar rules, and enter networks built partly on shared religious trust. Islam does not eliminate fraud or conflict, but it provides a common framework for contracts, inheritance, charity testimony, and commercial obligation. Arabic literacy becomes one of the most influential tools carried along the routes. A spoken agreement may depend on memory and witnesses, while a written document can travel with a caravan. Merchants record debts, quantities, partnerships, and letters of introduction. Scholars copy religious texts and teach students to read. Royal authorities who do not themselves convert may still employ Muslim scribes, because writing allows information to be preserved and transmitted with greater precision. The earliest written descriptions of Ghana survive partly because this literate commercial world observes the kingdom from within and beyond its markets. The Muslim quarter of the capital reflects this growing presence. Mosques provide places of worship but also serve as centers of teaching, discussion, and social organization. Travelers find lodging among people who share their customs. Disputes may be judged according to Islamic law within the merchant community, while matters involving the king or local subjects remain under royal authority. The two systems overlap without becoming identical. This arrangement requires political caution. Ghana's ruler benefits from Muslim merchants and the wealth they attract, but his legitimacy rests on older Soninka religious traditions. Sacred kingship connects the court to ancestors, protective forces, ritual specialists, and the prosperity of the land. Sudden rejection of these beliefs could threaten the ruler's relationship with chiefs and communities whose loyalty depends on them. The court therefore welcomes Islam without immediately allowing it to replace the spiritual foundations of the throne. Foreign writers sometimes describe the king as respectful toward Muslims even while remaining outside their faith. He permits mosques, receives Muslim advisors, and protects merchants whose taxes enrich the state. In return, these communities recognize his political authority. The balance is pragmatic, but it should not be understood as purely cynical. People can respect religious traditions they do not fully share, and individuals within the court may adopt certain practices gradually. The evidence remains incomplete, and conversion is rarely a single, easily dated event. Islam spreads unevenly. In commercial towns, it can take root quickly because travelers, teachers, and texts arrive regularly. In rural districts, older religious systems remain dominant for centuries. Even among converts, local customs do not vanish. Beliefs about ancestors, sacred places, healing, protection, and royal power may continue alongside Islamic prayer and identity. Scholars still debate how to describe this mixture, because terms such as conversion can imply a clean break that rarely occurs in lived history. One lesser-known feature of the process is the importance of small communities rather than dramatic mass movements. A handful of Muslim households in a market town can maintain a mosque, teach, children host travelers, and connect local traders with partners hundreds of kilometers away. Their influence grows not because they immediately dominate the population, but because they occupy strategic positions within exchange. A scribe who records a treaty or a merchant who arranges credit may shape events far beyond the size of his community. Religious scholarship also follows commerce. Teachers and jurists travel with caravans or settle near major markets. They bring ideas about theology, law, astronomy, calculation, and language. Knowledge of the stars has practical value for timekeeping and navigation. Arithmetic supports trade and taxation. Religious education therefore becomes linked to skills useful in administration and commerce. The mosque is a sacred space, but it can also become a doorway into a wider intellectual network. The arrival of Islam changes how Ghana is described to the outside world. Muslim geographers place the kingdom within a larger mental map. They record routes, rulers, commodities, customs, and distances, though often through second-hand reports. Their accounts preserve invaluable information, yet they also reflect their own assumptions. Practices unfamiliar to them may appear strange, while Muslim districts receive more detailed attention than communities beyond their direct contact. What survives in the record is therefore both evidence and interpretation. Tension is always possible. Muslim merchants may object to royal rituals or laws that conflict with their beliefs. Traditional authorities may fear that foreign religion will weaken ancestral obligations. Converts can occupy an uncertain position between communities. Yet Ghana's prosperity depends on preventing religious difference from disrupting trade. The king's protection allows the merchant quarter to flourish, while physical and ceremonial separation protects the independence of the royal cult. Over time, the boundary becomes more permeable. Muslim names appear among officials and elites. Local rulers in surrounding regions convert. Islamic burial practices, architecture, and education spread along the commercial corridors. Conversion can strengthen diplomatic ties with North African partners, though it does not make Sahelian states subordinate to them. West African Islam develops through local choices, adaptations, and debates rather than simple imitation. The process is slow enough that several religious worlds coexist for generations. At sunset, the call to prayer rises over stone houses in the merchant settlement. Beyond it, royal ceremonies follow rhythms older than the caravan routes. Traders calculate obligations in writing, while village elders preserve histories through speech. Neither world is frozen. Each changes through contact with the other. Islam does not create Ghana's trade, and it does not erase the society that existed before its arrival. It gives the network new institutions, new forms of knowledge, and new connections. Caravans now carry beliefs as durable as salt and as portable as gold. Long after individual kingdoms weaken, those beliefs will remain reshaping the city's courts and intellectual traditions of West Africa. The first signs of weakness do not arrive as a single catastrophe. No wall falls in one night, no caravan route vanishes at once, and no royal treasury suddenly becomes empty. Ghana's power begins to narrow through pressures that gather slowly around the trade system it has spent generations controlling. The kingdom remains wealthy, its rulers still command tribute, and merchants continue to cross the desert, but the balance between protection, taxation, and geography becomes harder to maintain. An empire built upon movement is always vulnerable when movement begins to change. The Western Sahel is not a stable stage beneath human history. Rainfall shifts across decades and centuries. A sequence of dry years can reduce harvest, thin pasture, and weaken the wells upon which settlements and caravans depend. Farmers who once produced surplus grain may struggle to feed their own households. Herders move farther in search of grass and water, sometimes entering cultivated lands and creating conflict. Royal storehouses receive less tribute precisely when the state needs more resources to secure roads and support armies. It is tempting to describe drought as the single cause of Ghana's decline, but the evidence remains incomplete. Archaeological and environmental records suggest periods of changing climate across the Western Sahel, yet conditions differ from one region to another. Some communities adapt by relocating fields, changing livestock patterns, or shifting toward more reliable water sources. Climate does not destroy a kingdom automatically. It increases pressure on political systems already facing competition. That competition grows along the edges of Ghana's commercial world. Neighboring rulers observe the wealth generated by caravans and seek to capture a portion of it. A route that once passed through Ghana's markets can be redirected toward another town if merchants find lower taxes, safer wells, or more favorable alliances. Even a modest shift matters. The kingdom's revenue depends not on a single shipment, but on the repeated passage of thousands of loads over many years. When traders begin choosing alternatives, the loss accumulates quietly. To the east, expanding Sahelian powers develop their own connections to the Niger River and Saharan trade. To the west and south, regional chiefs gain strength from agriculture, gold, and local commerce. Some remain tributaries only, while Ghana's army appears overwhelming. When royal authority weakens, they may withhold payments, raid neighboring districts, or negotiate independently with merchants. The empire's flexible structure, once an advantage, becomes dangerous. Distant provinces are linked to the centre through loyalty and benefit rather than permanent occupation. If those benefits decline, the links can break quickly. The gold trade itself may also move. Goldfields are not exhausted everywhere at once, but production shifts as miners discover new deposits. Political conditions change or older routes become insecure. Rising commercial centres farther south and east can draw merchants away from Ghana's traditional sphere. The kingdom still sits near important roads, but it no longer enjoys the same degree of control over the entire flow. Geography created its power, yet geography does not remain politically fixed. Desert communities add another layer of uncertainty. Berber groups who guide caravans, control wells, and dominate stretches of the Sahara are not passive servants of Ghana's economy. They pursue their own alliances and rivalries. A ruler south of the desert may claim authority over trade, but he cannot compel every northern confederation to obey. When political movements spread across North Africa and the Sahara, the relationships supporting the old routes are disrupted. Merchants respond rapidly to insecurity. They do not need to defeat Ghana in battle to weaken it. They need only avoid its markets. A caravan leader hearing reports of rebellion, excessive taxation, or unreliable wells may choose a longer route that promises greater safety. Information travels with every returning expedition, and reputation can change faster than royal policy. Once a market is considered dangerous, restoring confidence becomes difficult. The kingdom faces a costly decision. It can reduce taxes to attract commerce, sacrificing immediate revenue, or increase levies to compensate for declining traffic, risking further desertion. It can send soldiers to secure rebellious districts, but armies consume grain, animals, and treasure. A campaign that restores tribute may destroy crops and settlements, whose productivity the crown depends upon. Every attempt to defend the system places additional strain upon it. Internal succession may create further instability. The exact rules of Ghanaian kingship are imperfectly understood, though some accounts suggest inheritance through the ruler's sister's son, a system that ensures royal descent through the maternal line. Such arrangements can provide legitimacy, but no succession system eliminates rivalry. Powerful relatives, generals, provincial chiefs, and court factions may compete whenever a king dies. Foreign writers rarely record these struggles in detail, yet periods of disputed authority would offer subject territories a chance to break away. Religious change may sharpen political divisions without fully explaining them. Muslim communities are now well established in commercial towns, and some regional rulers adopt Islam. The royal court continues to draw legitimacy from older traditions. Coexistence remains possible as it has for generations, but religious identity can become connected to political alliances. Reform movements in the north may view the customs of Ghana's rulers with hostility, while local elites may fear the growing influence of foreign merchants and scholars. What begins as theological disagreement can merge with struggles over roots, taxes, and authority. The capital does not immediately become deserted. Markets continue. Officials still inspect goods. The king still receives tribute beneath symbols of wealth. Decline is rarely visible to those living through its earlier stages because old institutions continue to perform their familiar rituals. A court may appear magnificent even as fewer caravans arrive each year. Gold ornaments do not reveal whether the treasury is being replenished or slowly emptied. Ordinary people feel the pressure first. Farmers face heavier demands from officials attempting to replace lost trade revenue. Soldiers may requisition grain and animals. Merchants raise prices to cover greater risks. Communities near contested routes endure raids from royal forces, rebels, and desert warriors alike. Families move towards safer districts or stronger towns, reducing the population available to cultivate marginal lands. No single explanation fully accounts for Ghana's weakening. Environmental stress, commercial competition, political fragmentation, military threats, and changing religious alliances reinforce one another. Drought makes rebellion harder to suppress. Rebellion makes roads less secure. Insecure roads reduce tax revenue. Reduced revenue weakens the army, encouraging further rebellion. The commercial cycle that once strengthened the empire begins to turn in the opposite direction. By the 11th century, Ghana remains a significant power, but its control is no longer unquestioned. Beyond the northern horizon, a movement is gathering among Saharan Berbers, under leaders who combine religious reform with military ambition. Later histories will present their advance as the decisive blow against the kingdom. Yet even before their armies approach, Ghana's foundations are already under strain, and the road beneath the throne has begun to shift. The Almoravids enter the history of Ghana through a cloud of certainty created long after the events themselves. In many older accounts, their role appears simple. A militant Islamic movement rises among Saharan Berber groups, advances southward, conquers Ghana. In 1076, forces conversion, destroys the capital, and breaks the empire's control of the gold trade. The date is memorable, the sequence dramatic, and the story fits the familiar pattern of one kingdom falling before another. Yet the closer the evidence is examined, the less secure this version becomes. The Almoravid movement begins in the 11th century among Songhai Berber communities connected to the Western Sahara. Their leaders promote religious reform, stricter Islamic practice, and political unity in a region divided by rival tribes and competing commercial interests. Under figures such as Abdallah ibn Yasin and later commanders, the movement gains military strength. It takes control of important Saharan routes, expands north into Morocco, and eventually establishes an empire reaching across much of the western Maghreb and into the Iberian Peninsula. Trade is never far from this expansion. Control of desert corridors means access to salt gold taxes, animals, and strategic oases. The Almoravids are religious reformers, but they are also builders of political power. Their rise alters the balance among the desert groups that connect North Africa with Ghana. Old alliances are broken, rival communities are defeated or absorbed. Caravan routes that once operated through negotiated relationships now fall under new authorities with their own military and religious ambitions. Later writers claim that the Almoravids attack Ghana directly. The most famous date, 1076, is often associated with the capture of the capital, but the earliest surviving sources do not describe the event with the clarity expected from such a decisive conquest. Some accounts mention conflict between Ghana and northern Muslim powers. Others suggest that the kingdom came under pressure or that its rulers eventually adopted Islam. The evidence remains incomplete, and no contemporary chronicle provides a detailed description of an Almoravid army storming Koumbi Saleh. Archaeology creates further problems for the traditional story. Excavations at Koumbi Saleh have revealed periods of change, rebuilding, abandonment, and continued occupation, but no universally accepted destruction layer proving that the city was violently razed in 1076. There is no field of weapons, burned architecture, or mass burial that can be linked confidently to a single Almoravid assault. Absence of evidence does not prove that no attack occurred, especially in a settlement built partly from materials that leave limited traces. Still, the physical record does not support the neat image of a capital suddenly annihilated. One possibility is that the Almoravids conquered Ordagyust, a major trading town north of Ghana, rather than Ghana's royal centre itself. Ordagyust had close commercial connections with the empire and was strategically important to the trans-Saharan network. Its capture would have harmed Ghana severely without requiring the direct occupation of the capital. By controlling a northern terminal, the Almoravids could redirect trade, weaken Ghana's tax base, and place military pressure on its rulers. Another possibility is that conflict occurred through allied or subordinate desert groups rather than through a single large invasion. Saharan warfare often involves shifting coalitions, raids, and struggles over wells and caravan stations. A sequence of attacks could later be compressed into the story of one conquest. The name Almoravid may have become a convenient label for a broader period of northern pressure, even when the participants and outcomes differed from place to place. Religious transformation further complicates the narrative. Some later traditions present Ghana's ruler as converting under military pressure. Yet conversion may have occurred gradually through diplomacy, commerce, internal political change, or the growing influence of Muslim officials and merchants. A ruler could adopt Islam without forcing every subject to follow, and an Islamic court could continue practices inherited from older sacred kingship. The line between conquest and conversion is therefore difficult to draw. The idea of forced mass conversion is particularly uncertain. Islam has already been present in Ghana's merchant communities for generations. Muslim traders, scholars, and scribes are not strangers arriving behind an invading army. They are part of the kingdom's urban life. A change in royal religion may strengthen one existing community rather than introduce an entirely foreign faith. What survives in the record suggests increasing Islamic influence, but not a clear moment when the population is suddenly compelled to abandon every earlier belief. Why then does the conquest story become so influential? Partly because later historians search for a decisive cause of Ghana's decline. Empires are easier to explain when they fall on a single date. A victorious army provides a visible turning point, while shifting trade routes, drought, succession struggles, and gradual political fragmentation are harder to narrate. The Almoravids are powerful, geographically close, and active at roughly the right time. They become a convenient answer to a more complicated problem. The story also reflects the nature of medieval sources. Writers often organize history around dynasties, rulers, wars, and religious change. Slow economic processes attract less attention. A caravan route moving eastward over several decades may matter more than a battlefield, but it leaves no dramatic tale. A town losing population because merchants prefer another market rarely appears in chronicles. Military conquest can therefore seem more important in the written record than it was in lived reality. This does not mean the Almoravids are irrelevant. Their expansion almost certainly affects Ghana deeply. By reshaping Saharan politics, they threaten the alliances on which the kingdom depends. By controlling northern towns, they can influence the direction and taxation of trade. Their religious prestige may strengthen Muslim factions within Ghana and among neighbouring states. Even without a total conquest, they increase pressure on a kingdom already weakened by environmental and political strain. Ghana may have survived the crisis in reduced form. Later sources continue to mention a kingdom or city called Ghana after 1076, suggesting that neither the state nor the capital disappears immediately. Its rulers may lose territory while retaining ceremonial importance. Tributary regions may become independent. Commercial activity may continue on a smaller scale. The old empire contracts, but its name remains attached to authority long after its greatest power has passed. There may also have been periods of recovery. Political decline is rarely a straight downward line. A strong ruler can restore tribute, temporarily secure a route, or rebuild alliances. Markets can revive after conflict. Archaeological occupation does not cease everywhere at once. Yet the conditions that created Ghana's supremacy are changing too fundamentally for complete restoration. New centres are emerging, and gold is increasingly drawn toward networks beyond the old royal heartland. The Almoravid question therefore remains unresolved, not because nothing is known, but because the surviving clues support several overlapping processes. There is northern military pressure, there is religious change, there is disruption of trade. There may be direct warfare against Ghanaian forces and perhaps attacks on important settlements. What cannot be demonstrated securely is the old image of a single conquest that alone destroys the empire. The deeper explanation is less dramatic and more revealing. Ghana is not killed by one sword. It is weakened by a system coming apart at multiple points. The Almoravids may strike the kingdom, but they strike a structure already under strain. Their advance becomes one powerful force within a longer transformation, not the sole moment when the Salt Kingdom disappears. Ghana does not vanish and leave an empty landscape behind. Its roots remain, its markets retain memory, and the communities that once carried salt, gold, grain, and news continue to move across the Western Sahel. What changes is the direction in which political gravity pulls them. As the Old Kingdom loses control over tributaries and northern corridors, power shifts southward toward regions closer to the gold-producing lands and the fertile valleys of the Upper Niger. The commercial system survives its first great empire, and new rulers learn from the structure Ghana created. Among the states rising from this changing landscape is Soso, ruled in later tradition by Sumanguru Kante. Soso appears to have occupied part of Ghana's former sphere and attempted to dominate the trade routes and smaller Soninka and Manda-speaking communities around them. The surviving story is preserved most vividly in oral epics recorded centuries later, where political memory merges with heroic narrative, supernatural imagery, and the authority of professional storytellers. The details cannot always be separated cleanly into history and legend, but the broader struggle reflects a real contest over the territory and commercial networks left behind by Ghana's decline. Farther south in the region known as Mandan, another political force is gathering. Its communities lie closest to the headwaters of the Niger and within reach of the goldfields of Bambouk and Bura. This position offers advantages different from those of ancient Ghana. Ghana prospered largely by standing between desert merchants and southern gold. Mali will grow by extending authority more deeply into the agricultural and gold-producing zones themselves, while still reaching north toward the salt caravans. The figure at the centre of Mali's foundation is Sundiata Keita. Oral traditions remember him as an exiled prince who overcomes physical weakness, gathers allies, defeats Sumanguru, and establishes a new empire after the Battle of Kirina, usually dated to around 1235. Some elements of this account are impossible to verify, and scholars still debate the chronology and historical identity of many individuals within the epic. Yet Sundiata's emergence represents more than the victory of one ruler. It marks the political unification of Manda-speaking territories around a dynasty capable of controlling farms, armies, gold routes, and river communications. Mali's expansion absorbs communities once tied to Ghana and inherits portions of the older kingdom's commercial knowledge. Soninka merchants do not cease trading when royal borders change. Caravan guides do not forget wells because a dynasty falls. Market families preserve partnerships across generations, adapting to new taxes and new patrons. The transfer of power therefore includes continuity beneath conquest. Mali does not invent trans-Saharan trade. It occupies and enlarges a network built over centuries. The Upper Niger becomes one of its greatest strengths. Unlike the desert routes, the river provides water-fish fertile floodplains and an internal transport corridor. Boats can move people and goods between settlements more efficiently than pack animals crossing dry land. Agricultural communities produce millet, sorghum, rice, and livestock feeding towns and armies. The empire gains a broader economic base than trade taxation alone, allowing its rulers to sustain authority even when individual caravan routes shift. Gold remains essential. The fields of bambuk continue to matter while boer grows in importance farther south. Mali's rulers seek to influence access without necessarily administering every mine directly. As under Ghana, producers and local chiefs retain knowledge that the imperial court cannot completely control. The gold travels through market chains where it is weighed, taxed, and exchanged for salt cloth copper, horses' beads, and other goods. What survives in the record suggests strong royal oversight, but not a simple monopoly over every grain of metal. Salt still moves in the opposite direction. Northern mines supply the slabs demanded by cities, herders, fishing communities, and farming populations. Mali's authority stretches towards Saharan terminals, and sometimes farther into the desert, though control changes according to military strength and alliances with local groups. The empire's rulers understand the old lesson: possession of the mine matters less than the ability to secure the route between mine and buyer. Commercial towns gain new importance under Mali. Walata near the desert margin becomes a major southern terminal for caravans. Farther east, Timbuktu and Gao develop along the Niger and its connected routes, though their greatest fame lies ahead. Merchants from North Africa encounter an empire larger and more deeply rooted in the savannah than Ghana had been at its height. Muslim scholars and traders find established communities, mosques and courts increasingly familiar with Islamic diplomacy and written administration. Mali's rulers are more openly associated with Islam, but the pattern of religious coexistence continues. Kings may perform Islamic obligations, correspond with Muslim rulers, and employ learned advisors while drawing legitimacy from Mande political traditions and ancestral authority. Conversion does not erase older customs. The empire's identity forms through accommodation with royal power, speaking in several religious languages at once. Military organization allows Mali to bind these regions together. Cavalry gives the elite speed and prestige, while infantry and archers provide numbers. Provincial rulers govern in the emperor's name or acknowledge his supremacy through tribute. The empire remains a layered political structure rather than a uniformly administered territory. Some districts are closely supervised, others are loyal because imperial protection benefits trade, or because resistance would invite intervention. The fate of Ghana within this new order is revealing. By the 13th century, the Old Kingdom is greatly reduced, and traditions suggest that its remaining territories eventually recognize Mali's authority. The name Ghana does not disappear, nor do the Soninka people who created the empire. Instead, parts of the former state are incorporated into a larger political world. Royal families, merchants, craftsmen, and religious specialists continue under altered conditions. The conqueror inherits not ruins alone, but institutions, memories, and skilled populations. Mali's wealth soon surpasses what foreign observers remember of Ghana. This is not because salt or gold suddenly becomes valuable for the first time. It is because Mali controls a wider combination of productive land-river transport, mining access, and trans-Saharan exchange. The old commercial axis now connects to a more expansive imperial base. Revenue supports armies, courts, building scholarship, diplomacy, and royal journeys, whose scale will astonish distant societies. Yet the foundations remain familiar. A northern block of salt travels south through danger. Southern gold moves north in a form light enough to conceal. Officials collect duties. Merchants compare routes. Local communities negotiate how much authority to surrender to distant rulers. The names of kings change, but the logic of the road survives. Ghana's greatest legacy is therefore not a fallen capital or a vanished treasury. It is the political discovery that an empire can rise by organizing exchange between ecological worlds. Mali adopts that discovery, moves its center closer to the Niger and the goldfields, and expands it across an even broader landscape. The Salt Kingdom has weakened, but the system it mastered is entering its richest age. Mali's expansion does not bring the trans-Saharan system to its final form. It enlarges the network, strengthens the link between the Niger River and the desert, and turns several commercial towns into centers of learning and power. Yet the same scale that makes Mali formidable eventually makes it difficult to hold together. Provincial governors gain influence, succession disputes weaken the court, and distant regions begin to test the limits of imperial authority. Among those regions is Gao, an old trading city on the eastern bend of the Niger, where a new empire prepares to take control of the routes that once enriched Ghana and Mali. Gao's location is exceptional. The Niger River approaches the southern edge of the Sahara, creating a meeting point between river transport, Sahelian agriculture, pastoral routes, and caravans arriving from the north. Goods can move by boat along the river and then continue overland toward desert markets. Grainfish, livestock, cloth, and gold pass through the city, while salt copper horses and North African products arrive from the opposite direction. Gao is not merely a town at the end of a caravan road. It is a hinge connecting several transportation systems. The people who build political power around Gao are known as the Songhai. Their origins are complex, shaped by river communities, regional migrations, local dynasties, and long contact with neighboring peoples. Early rulers establish authority in the area before Mali reaches its height. For a time, Gao falls under Malian influence, though the degree of direct control is uncertain. Songhai rulers may acknowledge Mali's supremacy while retaining significant local power. As Mali weakens, they regain independence and begin expanding outward. The decisive transformation begins under Sunni Ali, who comes to power in 1464. He's remembered as a brilliant and ruthless military commander who combines cavalry, infantry, and a river fleet to conquer cities and secure routes. His boats move soldiers along the Niger, allowing campaigns to advance faster than armies dependent entirely on land. River power gives Songhai a strategic advantage that neither Ghana nor Mali used in quite the same way. The empire can strike settlements, transport supplies, and reinforce distant positions through the waterway that runs through its political heart. Timbuktu becomes one of Sunni Ali's most important prizes. The city has grown from a seasonal gathering place near desert wells into a major commercial and intellectual center. Its position allows salt from northern mines to enter the Niger region, while grain, gold, and other products move toward the Sahara. Berber groups, merchants, clerics, craftsmen, and local communities all contribute to its growth. By the 15th century, Timbuktu is valuable enough that controlling it means controlling one of the principal gateways between desert and river, The city's later fame as a centre of scholarship can obscure its commercial foundation. Books teaching and religious institutions flourish because trade supports them. Wealthy families commission manuscripts, sponsor scholars, and maintain schools. Paper arrives through long-distance networks. Copyists reproduce works on law, theology, grammar, astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. Private libraries become symbols of prestige. A manuscript may be worth more than many ordinary goods, not because knowledge replaces commerce, but because commerce makes the circulation of knowledge possible. Farther southwest adds another dimension to the empire. Located near inland waterways and productive agricultural lands, it serves as a collection point for goods from regions south of the Sahel. Gold cola nuts, grain, livestock, and crafted products move through its markets. From Jenne, merchandise travels north and east toward Timbuktu, Gao, and the desert routes. When Sunni Ali captures the city after a prolonged siege, he links the agricultural and commercial zones of the inland Niger Delta more securely to Songhai power. Sunni Ali's religious reputation remains disputed. Some Muslim chroniclers portray him as cruel towards scholars and inconsistent in Islamic observance, while oral traditions may remember him more favourably as a powerful ruler rooted in local beliefs. These accounts reflect political and religious tensions as much as personal character. He appears to have used Islamic institutions when useful, while also relying on older Songhai traditions of sacred authority. As in Ghana and Mali, the ruler governs a society in which several religious systems overlap. After Sunni Ali's death, power passes briefly to his son before being seized by Askia Muhammad in 1493. The new ruler gives the empire a more openly Islamic political character and strengthens administrative organization. He undertakes the pilgrimage to Mecca, develops diplomatic connections, and associates his kingship with the wider Muslim world. Yet his state remains distinctly West African, built on local military structures, provincial loyalties, river transport, agricultural production, and inherited systems of tribute. Under Askia Muhammad, Songhai reaches its greatest extent. Governors oversee major regions. Officials supervise taxation, markets, and trade. Judges and scholars gain influence in Muslim towns. The empire's rulers seek to regulate weights and measures, protect merchants, and secure the routes linking gold-producing lands with Saharan salt deposits. The details of administration vary across the vast territory, and the evidence remains incomplete, but Songhai appears to have developed a more formal imperial structure than many earlier Sahelian states. Salt remains one of the central commodities. The mines of Tagaza fall within Songhai's sphere and their output travels south in heavy slabs. Control of the mines is politically valuable, but maintaining that control requires cooperation with desert communities and protection of the caravan routes. A mine surrounded by emptiness cannot enrich an empire unless animals, labourers, food supplies, and merchants connect it to buyers. Gold continues to move north, though the major producing regions are often far from Songhai's direct centre. The empire taxes and channels the trade rather than commanding every source. Enslaved people, ivory, cola nuts, leather, and grain also circulate while horses, textiles, metal goods, and luxury products move southward. The network is broader than the simple exchange of salt for gold, but those two commodities remain its most enduring symbols because each represents a different ecological world. The cities along the Niger become places where these worlds are made visible. In Gao, royal power stands beside commercial wealth. In Timbuktu, merchants, jurists, and scholars gather around mosques and markets. In Jenne, riverine agriculture and southern trade feed the northern routes. Boats carry goods between them while caravans extend their reach across the Sahara. Foreign visitors sometimes describe these cities with amazement, but no single account captures their full complexity. They are African urban centers shaped by local labor political ambition, environmental adaptation, and international exchange. Their prosperity does not depend on isolation from the wider world, nor on passive reception of outside influence. They actively organize the flow of goods and ideas across enormous distances. By the 16th century, the commercial system first mastered by Ghana has expanded into something even larger. Salt from the desert passes through imperial hands, gold from the south enters global markets, and manuscripts travel alongside ordinary cargo. The road has become a network of roads, rivers, schools, courts, and cities. Yet greater wealth brings greater competition, and the empire that commands the system also becomes the largest prize within it. The kingdom of Ghana disappears from political maps long before it disappears from memory. Its royal court weakens, tributary regions pass into other hands, and the caravans that once enriched its rulers increasingly favor cities controlled by Mali and Songhai. Yet the structures Ghana helped shape continue to organize West African history for centuries. The empire's most durable achievement is not a monument, a surviving palace, or a single treasure. It is a way of joining landscapes that appear almost impossible to connect. Later rulers inherit the essential logic of Ghana's power. They protect markets, tax movement, negotiate with desert communities, and use commercial wealth to support armies and courts. Mali expands the system toward the Niger and the goldfields. Songhai binds river cities to Saharan mines and intellectual centers. Smaller states and merchant communities preserve parts of the same network even when imperial borders shift. The road survives every throne built upon it. Trade families are especially important in carrying this continuity forward. Merchants preserve knowledge of prices, languages, wells, political customs, and trusted partners. Their connections can outlive dynasties because commerce depends on relationships extending beyond royal borders. When one capital declines, traders move toward another. When taxes rise, they seek alternative routes. When war closes a road, they negotiate or redirect their cargo. Empires attempt to command trade, but merchant communities give the system its memory. The Soninka people also remain long after the empire associated with Ouagadougou has contracted. Soninka-speaking communities spread across parts of Mauritania, Mali, Senegal, the Gambia, and neighboring regions, often maintaining strong traditions of migration and commerce. Their histories do not reduce neatly to the rise and fall of one kingdom. Families move, establish new settlements, participate in later states, and preserve stories connecting them to an older political world. Among the most powerful of those stories is the legend of Ouagadougou and the serpent Bida. The surviving versions differ as oral traditions often do. In one widely known form, the prosperity of Ouagadougou depends upon a pact with a great serpent who demands the sacrifice of a young woman at regular intervals. When a man kills the serpent to save the chosen victim, the creature curses the kingdom, and Ouagadougou's abundance begins to fail. Drought, the loss of gold, and political fragmentation follow. The legend should not be read as a literal record of Ghana's decline. There is no archaeological evidence that a supernatural serpent controlled rainfall or gold production. Yet the story contains historical truths in symbolic form. It connects political order with environmental prosperity. It remembers that wealth depends on obligations, and that breaking an established balance can bring disaster. It may preserve distant memories of drought, social conflict, changing ritual authority, or the collapse of relationships that once held the kingdom together. Scholars still debate when the tradition took its present shape, and how much it reflects events from Ghana's imperial period, but its endurance reveals how deeply Ouagadougou entered the historical imagination. Oral specialists carry such memories across generations. In parts of West Africa, griots and other hereditary performers preserve genealogies, political traditions, praise songs, and accounts of migration. Their histories do not function like modern archives. They change according to audience circumstance and the meaning of the past in the present. Repetition preserves central themes while performance allows detail to shift. This makes oral tradition difficult to use as simple chronology, but invaluable for understanding how communities remember legitimacy, loss, and belonging. Archaeology provides a different form of memory. At Koumbi Saleh, ruined walls rise only slightly above the dry ground. Excavators have uncovered stone houses, narrow streets, courtyards, wells, mosques, pottery beads, metal objects, and traces of long-distance commerce. The remains do not resemble the glittering capital imagined by readers of medieval accounts. Gold rarely waits in abandoned rooms for archaeologists to discover it. Valuable objects are carried away, recycled, inherited, or looted. What remains is the city's structure, the spaces where people slept, prayed, traded cooked, stored goods, and drew water. The royal settlement remains more elusive. Its precise location and scale are still uncertain, and no single discovery has resolved every question surrounding the ancient capital. Buildings made from earth and wood leave weaker traces than stone merchant houses. Political centres can also shift across time, meaning that different rulers may not have occupied exactly the same site. The evidence remains incomplete, but uncertainty does not make the kingdom unreal. It reminds us that some civilizations survive more clearly in networks and memories than in monumental architecture. The landscape preserves evidence on a much larger scale. Old routes run between wells, oases, river valleys, and salt deposits. Some paths have faded while others remain useful, because geography has not changed enough to make them irrelevant. The desert still concentrates movement around water. The Sahel still demands adaptation to uncertain rainfall. Rivers still create corridors of settlement and exchange. Political borders may be modern, but the environmental logic beneath them is ancient. Salt continues to make the old system visible. In Saharan mining regions, workers still extract mineral from deposits formed by vanished bodies of water, although methods, markets, and political conditions have changed. Trucks now carry much of the burden once placed entirely upon camels, yet caravan transport has not vanished from every remote landscape. The image of salt slabs crossing the desert belongs neither wholly to the medieval past nor wholly to the present. It is a surviving fragment of a much older relationship between scarcity and distance. Gold carries a different legacy. West Africa's ancient gold trade helped connect the region to North African, Mediterranean, and Middle Eastern economies. The metal that passed through Ghana contributed to coinage, royal treasuries, ornaments, and commercial expansion far beyond the Sahel. Yet foreign accounts often remembered the gold while overlooking the political intelligence that moved it. Ghana was not simply fortunate enough to stand near wealth. Its rulers created institutions capable of taxing, protecting, and regulating exchange across one of the world's most difficult environments. That accomplishment matters because older histories sometimes portrayed sub-Saharan Africa as isolated or lacking complex states before sustained European contact. Ghana's existence makes such claims impossible to defend. Long before Atlantic empires redirected global commerce toward the coast, West African rulers governed extensive territories, maintained cities, supported specialized labor, negotiated cultural difference, and participated in international trade. Their institutions were not copies of Mediterranean kingdoms. They were responses to African landscapes, resources, and political traditions. The name Ghana itself gains a second life in the 20th century. In 1957, the former British colony of the Gold Coast becomes independent and adopts the name Ghana. The modern country lies southeast of the ancient empire's core, but the choice is deliberate. It invokes a powerful African state from before colonial rule and places modern independence within a much longer history of sovereignty. The name crosses geography because memory can carry meanings that borders cannot contain. Still, the ancient kingdom should not be turned into a perfect symbol. Its prosperity includes warfare, hierarchy, enslavement, forced labor, and unequal taxation. The same trade that supports cities and scholarship also carries captives. The same court that protects merchants can extract heavily from farmers and tributary communities. Remembering Ghana honestly means recognizing both its political achievement and the human costs beneath its wealth. What survives in the record suggests a kingdom neither mysterious in the sense of being unknowable, nor simple enough to be reduced to salt exchanged for gold. Ghana is a layered society built from farmers, herders, miners, smiths, traders, officials, soldiers, enslaved workers, religious specialists, and rulers. Its history lies in the interaction between them. The king may stand at the center, but the empire exists only because countless people keep goods, information, and obligations moving across the landscape. The abandoned city, the oral epic, the modern national name, and the pale salt road all preserve different parts of the same past. None offers a complete picture. Together they reveal how a kingdom can fall politically, while remaining embedded in the systems that follow it. Ghana loses its empire but not its place in West African history. Beneath Mali's wealth, Songhai's cities, the merchant routes of later centuries, and the memories of Ouagadougou lies the outline of the first great salt kingdom still visible where desert and savanna meet. The desert grows quieter when viewed across centuries. The caravans become smaller in memory, reduced to dark lines beneath an enormous sky. The voices of merchants fade, the royal ceremonies end, and the markets that once measured salt and gold return slowly to dust. Walls collapse, wells fill with sand. Roads survive only because someone somewhere still remembers where water can be found. Yet disappearance is rarely complete. A kingdom does not live only inside its palaces, and it does not die when its final ruler loses a battle. It remains in the direction of an old road, in the name carried by a distant nation, in a family history repeated beside an evening fire, and in the habits of trade inherited by people who may no longer remember where those habits began. Ghana's wealth once depended on the separation of worlds. Salt lay buried beneath a desert where crops could not grow. Gold emerged far to the south in lands most northern merchants would never see. Between them stretched heat, thirst, language, faith, fear, and distance. The kingdom turned that separation into connection, and for generations its rulers drew power from the movement between need and abundance. But the road was always older than the throne. It belonged to guides who read stars, miners who cut white slabs from the earth, farmers who filled grain stores, and traders who trusted names more durable than borders. Kings taxed it and armies defended it, yet none could own it forever. When Ghana weakened, the road continued toward Mali. When Mali fractured, it continued toward Songhai. When Songhai fell, commerce found other centers. Now the old landscape holds the final image. Evening settles over the Sahel, softening the line where grassland gives way to desert. Somewhere beneath the sand lie fragments of pottery, broken tools, camel bones, and the foundations of rooms whose occupants once believed their city stood near the center of the world. Farther north, salt remains locked in ancient earth. Farther south, rivers continue carrying grains of gold through dark sediment. The kingdom between them is gone, but the distance remains. And within that distance, almost invisible until history teaches the eye how to see it, the memory of Ghana still travels.